Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari, and this is Great Big History Podcast. And in this episode, we destroy the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, the decline and fall of the Roman Empire is one of the most written about topics in all of history. It is the great question. There are more theories about why it collapsed, from lead in the water to Christianity to climate change to decadence and homosexuality to just, I think at one count there was 350 or so different ideas of what destroyed the Roman Empire. It is the great question of historians. Why did this happen? Why did this great civilization come to an end? And the answer we'll come up with, the answer we will focus on, is politics. Is the answer we have had in the destruction and the end of other civilizations. The truth of the matter is Roman civilization doesn't end. It fractures and evolves. We get the three great Romantic languages, Italian, French, and Spanish. That's Rome continuing. We get Catholic Christianity, which is Italian. It's Italian Christianity continued. We get a whole host of continuations into the Middle Ages of the Roman culture. Kind of like how dinosaurs became birds, that Romans became Italians and French and Spaniards. So, but where do we start? Well, we start with the Pax Romana, the Great Roman Peace from 27 BC to 180 AD, and especially the five good emperors. The 100 years from 96 AD to 180 AD are five in a row good emperors, from Nerva to Marcus Aurelius. Each one of these are good. Trajan, Hadrian, Antonius Pius, Marcus Aurelius, and this is the height. Augustus is good, but this period from 96 AD to 180 AD is the height of Roman civilization. To be alive in 100 AD in Rome is to live the best life on earth possible at that time. The death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 AD and the ascension of his son, Commodius, brings about trouble because Commodius turns out to be unstable. And the problem is that so much power, so much legitimacy is put into one person that when that one person is bad, a Caligula, a Nero, a Commodius, the structure begins to crack. Without having a good leader at the top, legitimacy begins to fall apart. And what happens is, after Commodius, we get a series. Well, with Commodius, we get a series of bad emperors. And those bad emperors bring about civil wars. Why? Because if they're a bad emperor, there are generals, colonels around the world who are going, hey, I could do a better job than this. This guy sucks. I could be emperor. And emperor is a pretty good job. And what happens when a bunch of these guys think that at the same time? Well, they'll fight it out. And what increasingly happens is the three armies, the one against the Germans, the one against the Goths, and the one against the Persians, increasingly fight each other. They see each other as not so much as Roman, as a separate army doing its own thing with a separate culture. And what we get is a series of civil wars. And what this is called is a third century crisis. Because for about 100 years, again, Rome suffers for 100 years of civil war. Now, we had 5 good emperors in 100 years. But there is a period during the 3rd century crisis where we have 25 emperors in 26 years. They become emperor, and they are immediately overthrown. They are murdered. They are killed by the crowd in Rome. So we have instability. The empire is adrift. Without a good leader, local officials start doing their own things. The armies start doing their own things. There's no help from the patrician. Why? Well, because the patricians got kicked out. They were a big fish in a big pond. And now there's a whale, the emperor. Well, they weren't going to get good jobs. They weren't going to be leaders. And so any patrician who wanted to be important went local. They left government. They left Rome. And they found some little dinky town in France, in Spain, where they could be the big shot. Remember, auctoritas, authority. Well, you're not going to have that in Rome anymore. So what these guys do is leave. And Caligula and Nero prove it because they start murdering people. And you're like, you know what? I don't need this. I'm rich. I don't have any power. And now I might be murdered by the emperor because he's crazy. And what they do is they go to Britain. They go to France. They go to Africa. They go east. And they find a little town. And they set up shop. They buy, a couple 100,000 acres. Because they're rich. They're from Rome. They're patricians in Rome. So they're the highest of the high. And what happens is they find a little town, maybe in northern Italy, in the Triol. And they find a little town. And they set up shop. And they buy a couple 100 acres, a couple 1,000 acres. And immediately they become the most important person in town. So they get elected mayor. They solve problems. They get elected judge. Because a rich dude solves problems. Because poor people have one problem. Poor people only have one problem. Not enough money. And so if they need stuff, they'll go to the rich guy. Schools will go to the rich guy. Like charities go to the rich guy and they say, please, sir, can you help us? And he says, of course I could help you. You need a place for a festival? I have a farm with 100 acres. Here, I'll give you 10 acres and you can put up your festival. He becomes the family who runs the town, who solves problems. All right, they're not a big fish in the big pond anymore. What they are is a big fish in a small pond. But that means that if Rome ever needs talent, they're stuck. All they have is the dynasty. They can't get beyond the extended family. They don't have access to the same talent that could bring in a Scipio, that could bring in a Gracchus. They can't pull, that could find a Cincinnatus. There are no Cincinnatuses in the 3rd century crisis. There just aren't. And so they went local. They threw up their hands and they said, enough. I don't care about Rome. I'm going to set up my own little shop. I'm going to have my own little kingdom. I'm going to be an important person in a small little town, small little world. And that's going to be cool. So there's no help from the patricians. They lose that talent, these emperors. The army also gets worse. Why? Because it's murdering each other. The Roman army is constantly fighting each other. And if you're a Roman, why would you join the Roman army in the 3rd century? Why? You're just going to end up fighting other Romans and being butchered and by men who know how to kill people with swords. Like, why would you join that? And so what happens is the civil wars deplete the army. They need more men. And what they start to do is hire Goths, hire Germans, hire Persians and Armenians. They hire people on the borders to fill in the Roman army. Now, they're not Romans, and they're not going to operate like Romans, and they're not going to become Romans, and they're not going to fight like Romans, which means you get a worse army. Increasingly, the army doesn't look Roman, doesn't act Roman, doesn't fight Roman, and doesn't have the ability of a Roman army. Increasingly, it's a different foreign army made up of mercenaries. Now, we talked about the end of the Roman Empire being 476, and the 3rd century crisis ends in 280. So can we recover? Like, There's still 200 years left. Like, we got time. Can we recover? Yes. Yeah, we can recover. All we need is a couple of good emperors, and we start to get one with Diocletian. All we need is nothing bad to happen. All we need is a couple of good emperors in a row that settle down, reestablish legitimacy, fix the army, convert those Goths and German mercenaries, either pay them off and send them back to Germany, or convert them into Romans. We can do this. This isn't a problem. This is bad. This ship has definitely hit the iceberg, but it's not sinking just yet. All we need is the hull to hold. All we need is nothing bad to happen. We can recover. Rome can be saved. So what happens? The Huns invade Europe. Great. Something bad happens. What happens is a giant bunch of nomadic horse lords from China cross Siberia, cross Central Asia, wreck the European frontiers of Russia, which aren't Russia yet, destroy Scythians, end up in Europe in what is modern-day Poland, and scare the hell out of everybody, because these are barbarians. The Germans, they live in their towns, they have their sheep, they got their cows. They're like the Gauls. So the Romans knew how to deal with them. The Goths, a little more barbarian, but more or less the same. Like, settling down, we can understand them. They're a little more warlike. They're a little less organized than many of the German tribes. The German tribes are tough, but the Goths are a little less further developed towards cities and all that. But we can deal with that. Like, we understand them. The Romans understand these kind of barbarians because they dealt with the Gauls. So we can deal with them. The Huns, on the other hand, are totally different, totally new, and scare everybody. Remember we talked about nomadic horse lords wreck civilizations, the Bronze Age collapse, the destruction of Assyria? Here the Huns come. The Huns got kicked out of China by the Han, H-A-N-S. And they get in like a wrecking ball. Just go across. They leave history. Like, we have Chinese records of them. They get kicked out of China, and then the Chinese are like, well, they're gone, so they stop writing about the Huns. So they leave history. Because remember, nomads don't write anything down, so we have no idea what happens. But 200 years later, they explode into Eastern Europe and scare everybody. Well, if you're the Goths and the Germans, you can only go in one direction, and that is into the Roman Empire. You want to get away from these guys. This is Miley Cyrus on a flaming wrecking ball, just singing naked at you. It is scary, and you got to get out of the way. And the Germans go west, and the Goths go south, because everybody wants to get out of the way of this. So if you're the Romans, you got a problem. They scare the Goths. They scare the Germans. They're getting pushed into the Roman Empire. But wait. We've got Natio. We can convert them. So these people are flooding the border. They're coming over. But we can convert them. All we have to do is beat them up. Show them that that they can't just run into Rome, that they just can't squat on Roman land, that what we have to do is just beat them up, a couple of big battles, and convert them, and make them into Romans. And we can do that. We have the method. We have Natio. So this isn't so bad. All right? It looks bad. We got weak emperors. We still haven't recovered. We haven't gotten that strong emperor yet. Our army is definitely worse than it was 100 years ago. There are Goths and Germans in that army now who might not want to fight their cousins. But in theory, if we win a few big battles, we can convince the Goths and the Germans to convert, to become Romans. And we will all fight together against the Huns, and we'll win. Easy as pie. Roman Empire survives. We actually get to expand into Gothica and Germany. So everything except for maybe Poland and Russia becomes part of the Roman Empire. And boom, we've united modern Europe. We could go, maybe a future emperor invades Scandinavia, and boom, we have a modern, unified Europe to last another 1,000 years. All we have to do is win our battles. Nothing bad to happen. Well, guess what happens? The Battle of Adrianople, and we lose. The Battle of Adrianople in 376 AD, the emperor decides, instead of waiting for reinforcements, he is going to go and fight. He is going to go and win. And he goes and fights the Visigoths, one of the Gothic tribes, and he loses. His army gets crushed. He tries to escape. He hides in a barn. The Visigoths light it on fire and murder the emperor. And they have wiped out a Roman army, which means there is nothing stopping them. There is the army in the east protecting against the Persians. If they come west to fight the Goths, then the Persians will invade, so they can't really go anywhere. And there's the army against the Germans in the north. If they come south to go fight the Goths, the Germans are just going to cross the border, so they can't move. And so all of a sudden, that defense in depth is just wide open. The Goths can just run around. And what this does is break the empire in two. The death of the emperor just breaks the empire in two. Why? Well, because you end up with two emperors, one in the east and one in the west. You've got one in Constantinople, one in Rome. The one in Rome is worried about the Germans. The one in the east has to worry about the Goths and the Persians. So you end up with two emperors, two armies, two of everything, which means it's half of each. Because the Constantinople in the east is going to husband its resources, is going to keep its stuff. It's not going to share it. In fact, they're going to help pay off Visigoths to go west. Hey, go invade the empire in the west. Go invade that usurper. Because with the death of the emperor at the Battle of Adrianople, you get two emperors. Two guys pop up and go, I'm emperor. One guy in Rome, one guy in Constantinople. So they don't like each other. They view each other as a fake emperor. And so instead of coming together to fight the unified foe, to beat the Goths, to fight the Huns, to unify, instead they cracked in two. And the East defended itself and the West defended itself. And what happened is just a mass mobilization, just a mass movement of people. Rome turned out not to be able to stop them. You have Rome worried about the north. You have Constantinople worried about the east. And what happens is a series of terrible events. In 406, the winter is so cold, the Rhine River freezes, and every German who wants to get out of the way of the Huns comes over the border, just floods the zone, just overwhelms the Roman army in the west. In 410, the Visigoths sack Rome. They had entered Italy a few years before. They marched down like Hannibal did, down the Apennine, and then in 410 they sacked Rome. And with that, the western half of the empire collapses. The Visigoths end up in Spain. The Vandals go all the way across France, into Spain, into North Africa. The Franks come occupy northern France. Northern Gaul, they'll turn it into France. The Angles and the Saxons by sea will leave Denmark and northern Germany and end up in England. A Roman British army tries to escape England and get back to Italy. It gets smashed. It gets run over by this. It didn't know what was happening. So as it was going across Gaul, this just flood, just the tsunami of people just overwhelmed it. Now you have to understand, that tsunami of people is a few 100,000. The Roman Empire had 25 million people in it, 30 million people in it. It should have been able to absorb those people. It should not have been overwhelmed. So then why did it win? Why did the Roman Empire collapse? Well, it was weakened by civil war. It had been destroyed. Its armies had been destroyed. Its emperors had been humiliated by a barbarian invasion from outside the empire. Unlike the civil wars where Rome was being destroyed by inside the empire, now it's coming from outside the empire. And in the end, Romans didn't believe in Rome anymore. The emperors were so terrible. They didn't think the emperors would help them. There are letters from England being sent to Rome saying, help us. These Angles and these Saxons are showing up. Help us. Send an army. We're here. And they get no response because there's nobody listening. Because Italy is collapsing. Because France is collapsing. The emperor can't protect them. Roman armies can't fight them. And so what people did was make the best deal possible. And that's where the patricians came in. Remember the patricians are in the big fish in the small town? Well, what happens is the barbarians come in and they come in and go, we are going to murder everybody. And they're like, whoa. Look, I'm the mayor. Leave me in charge and everyone will pay you money. And then you could buy whatever you want. We call it taxation. The barbarians didn't have this. They didn't have taxation. They had no idea what a sales tax is, what an income tax is. They don't live in that world. They don't have that kind of either money, education, receipts, control. And so they're like, wait, I can get money from you and I don't have to kill you? And they're like, yeah, and we'll pay you every year. If you kill us now, you get money 1 year. But if we pay you every year, you get money forever. This is what the Chinese do to the Mongols. Genghis Khan wanted to murder 30 million people and turn northern China into like grasslands for his horses. And it was Chinese officials who were like, wait, hold on. We'll pay you not to murder us every year. And just like with the Germans, the Genghis Khan's like, wait, how does that work? We don't have taxes. You have this thing called taxes? I kind of like that idea. You're going to pay me every year, whatever I want? And they're like, yes. And you, in exchange, don't murder us. And the patricians are there saying, leave me in charge, and I'll make sure it happens. And so the patricians are going to end up becoming the sirs, the lords, the nobility that run the local government. They become the local big shots because they're in charge. And the barbarians don't have any infrastructure. So they are perfectly willing to sit on top of Roman infrastructure so that money flows up to them. They're totally cool with that because it's less work for them. And so the patricians stay in charge at the local level. The Germans now have a method for being in charge at the upper level. And the people are protected, and they're looking and going, well, the Roman emperor is not fighting a civil war. Roman armies aren't attacking us. So I'll just do the best I can here. And there's a period of 100 years, 150 years, where the Roman Empire is not German. It's not yet France. It's not yet Spanish. It's not yet Italian. It's still Roman. It's still speaking Latin. It hadn't changed yet. But it begins to, as roads collapse, as markets collapse, as connections collapse, as the world becomes much more localized, because all of those German tribes start to settle down, and they don't talk to each other, and they don't trade with each other. And this is the Dark Ages. This is the beginning of the Dark Ages. Because there's no transnational infrastructure anymore. It all disappeared. It all becomes local. Everybody at the local level, at the town level, tries to make the best deal they can. And if I'm living in a town and a Frankish king comes along and he says, I am king of the Franks, I am chief of the Franks, I am going to kill you or you are going to give me money. I say, I'll give you money. Okay, you're in charge. You're cool. Fine. And so the empire died. in the West. In the East, it will continue. In the Greek-speaking East, it continues, and that will become the Byzantine Empire. But in the West, in Italy, in Spain, in North Africa, in France, and in Britain, it died. And it died because the emperors were bad, because the government didn't help the people, and because the people didn't believe in Rome anymore. They didn't think Rome could help them. And so they made the best deal they could. Rome died from apathy, from just people not caring for it anymore, not wanting to be Roman. Whereas Rome survived in the Punic Wars because Romans and non-Romans wanted Rome to survive. It's basically like how many of your relationships just end. Like, there are relationships that end with a big fight, and it's a big battle, and it's a big F you this and F you that, and I'm done, and I'm walking out, and you slam doors. But I bet many of you have relationships that you just stop calling. You just stop texting. You just there's no fight. There's no big worry. There's no nothing. It's just it ends because neither one of you cared enough to want it to continue. And so those ties that bind waste away. And what you get is the ruins of Rome, the end of the Roman Empire in the West. Now, it will continue in the East, and we will talk about that in part 3 of our course in the Byzantine Empire. Constantinople will survive, but Italy, Rome, Spain, North Africa, France, and Britain will descend into the Dark Ages, will descend into Germanic Europe, where the German kings, the German chiefs will become kings, fight each other. Eventually, the Huns will be defeated at the Battle of Chalons, Chlons. It is actually the last battle a Roman army fights, and it's allied with the Franks. In the end, the Roman army chooses who the successor will be, and what they chose was the enemy they knew, the Germans. They chose the Franks to be their successor, rather than the barbarian, Asiatic, Turkish-speaking Huns, who were so foreign. And they allied with the Franks, and they fought the Battle of Chalons, and the last battle the Roman army ever fought in the West was a victory that saved the West. If the Huns had won that battle, there would be no Middle Ages, because the Huns were different. The Huns were nomadic peoples. They didn't want to live in cities. They didn't care about trade. What would have happened is what happens to Central Asia after the Mongols, after Tamerlane. They would have ripped up the trade routes. They were doing it anyway. They would have plundered cities. In fact, after the Battle of Chalons, half of Attila the Hun dies of a brain aneurysm, and his two brothers both claim to be the new Khan. The Huns break into two parts. One of them goes back to the Ukraine. They're like, I don't want to be here. There's forests, there's all these cities. I don't want to be here. And they go back to the Ukraine, where there's flat grassland. And they live there for the next couple hundred years. Whereas the other Huns end up being crushed in a series of battles by Germanic and Byzantine armies in Central Europe. So Hungary is called Hungary because it's the land of the Huns. But the Magyars aren't Huns. The Magyars are Magyars. They're another nomadic people. They move in the 9th century. So Hungary is named the land of the Huns, but the real Huns, never really settled there. So, but what you get is the Dark Ages, the end of the Roman Empire in the West, and that is the end of our lecture. So, in our next lecture, we'll start with Christianity, and we'll talk about culture and values, of the new religion. Take care. Be safe. Bye.